Hey, what's up guys? You're here today with Nick the Informative Fisherman, and today I'd like to talk about rod action. Not power, rod action. And I think this is where a lot of people get confused about the issue. For example, I'm going to take my flipping and pitching rod that I use for bass fishing right here. Now people say, oh, is that a heavy action rod? Is that a light action rod? You know what? Don't even think about that. We're talking about just flat out action of the rod, not power. Don't confuse action and power or the size of the rod. It's all about action. What action is where the rod actually bends. For example, when I hold the base of this rod and I push down about the first 4 inches, you can see that the rod bends up here more towards the tip, giving the rod right here a lot of pulling, a lot of backbone, so a lot of strength is in this rod. This is why it's a flipping and pitching rod, where I can pull fish out of heavy cover. And when you see that it bends right up here towards the tip, it still allows me to feel that sensitivity, and it bends right here, so I have all that pulling power. So it's not a big whipping action, it's more of a controlled shot and a lot of power in the bones right there. So this is actually a fast action rod. Fast action meaning bending up here towards the tip, not so much in the middle and not in the very tip. If it was right here in the very tip, that would be an extra fast action. But more or less, it's right here in the first 1.5 feet, so that's a fast action rod. Let me grab another one. Let's grab one of my spinnerbait rods. For example, if I'm casting a spinnerbait, I want a relatively long cast, so I need something a little springier than that, that extra fast action. So I want a fast, close to moderate fast. So now we're getting close to the middle of the rod where you can see it bending, but not quite. The middle will be more or less in here, and that would be more of a crankbait rod because you don't want to hoist those treble hooks out of their mouth. You want to gradually increase the pressure. But I want accuracy in cast and a little further cast, so I want something with a little bit of whip to it. So I want a moderate fast action. So you can see that it's bending a little bit further down than my flipping and pitching rod. So right in there, you can see that's where it's going, which allows me to get, a good cast out there, a lot of whip to it, but it's not too much that it affects my control. So as you can see right there, that is a moderate fast action. Not bending all the way down, but bending close, relatively close. So in between medium and fast, right there, moderate fast. Let's grab another. This is my crankbait rod. Now for example, you can see that if I start pushing right there, it's already flexing right in the middle. This is a medium action, aka moderate action rod. Now why this is important for crankbaits is you're not hitting a particular spot. You're launching it as far as you can to get that bait down in the middle. The bait also has treble hooks on it, so I don't need a very hard hook set. I just need a nice smooth pull to set those treble hooks on them, and I need a lot of flex in the rod. Big, moderate whipping action rod like this, and this is 7 foot, so I can get a real catapult on the rod, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about action. So why would you want a moderate action rod? Well, you can sometimes get a little bit longer cast than your fast action rods, but that's not really what it's about. What it's really about is not ripping the hooks free. So a moderate action rod that bends right there in the middle is about not ripping the hooks free. It keeps a lot of play on the fish, a big bend on the fish. So it's constantly keeping pressure, and even if that fish swims towards you, that rod will retrieve a lot of that slack line. So it'll keep the tension on that line the whole time. And that's where moderate action comes into play. You wouldn't want to fish a standard J hook or a jig on a moderate action rod because say he's down there, I'm using a thick Shaughnessy hook on a jig, and I set that hook, but this rod gives so much give, that hook just barely plants itself in that bass, and then the bass spits it back out or shakes his head and throws my jig. A moderate action is the wrong rod for that. Now, would I want to use a fast action rod per se on the opposite? If I'm using a fast action rod, let's go back to my flipping rod. Let me put that up there. My flipping rod. Now remember how fast that tip is? It's right there. That's as far as it bends. Now if I'm using a crankbait on this rod with treble hooks and I set the hook, wham, all the backbone just puts too much pressure on those treble hooks and could rip them free. It's just too much power. I need that cushion of the rod, and that's why you go with a moderate to medium action rod for your prankers. Now, for example, let's step it up, because I know I was talking about the power confusing people. More or less, you want to focus on line class. When you look at your rod and you say, oh, this rod can handle 30-pound test line, don't worry so much about the power, if it's a heavy rod, a medium rod, a light rod. Don't focus on the power. Focus more on the line class and the action, and you'll start to develop a better sense of the type of fish you're fishing for and what action of rod actually applies to that fish. This is one of my down-rigging rods. I troll this right here. This is a trolling rod. It's a Penn Power Stick. Okay, and what it does is it has a big medium action bend right there. You can see that. It's almost medium fast because it does have a little backbone. I striper fish with this rod, so I do need a little bit more backbone than just your regular moderate action rod. So when you put it in the downrigger, it's got a lot of bend to it. You know, I can put it down there so when that striper hits it, wham! It sucks up a lot of line. It keeps the pressure on that fish. I could still use, you know, a bigger hook because I have the heavier line class to where I'm not going to snap my rod. The heavier line, the heavier the rod, it can still put a ton of pressure on that fish. So that's what you want to focus on right here. It's still a medium fast action because you can see that bends right up here, not quite the middle, a little bit more towards the tip than the center. So that's a moderate fast action, but this is a heavier line class, so I can use bigger lures. This is not for largemouth or smallmouth fishing. This is for trolling, okay? But you can still see it's got a lot of spring to it, a lot of whip to it. I can't pinpoint a direct spot that I want to hit with that much whip. It's just a massive amount of cushion to where if I'm trolling, there's a lot of cushion going on that fish, and the line is hardly ever going to go slack when you got a moderate action rod like this. Now we're going to go to the exact opposite. This is an ultralight rod. Right there, when we're talking about ultralight, is we're not talking about the action, we're going into power. But we're not going to focus on that. Remember how I told you the line class versus the action of the rod? Right here, this is 2 to 6 pound test. So if I put 30-pound line on a rod like this, I would snap it if I set the hook. So basically, I'm matching how light the line is to the rod. That's something you want to focus on, but we'll cover that in another video. This is a moderate action. This is almost below moderate. See where that bends? Right here. This is not fast or extra fast where it would be right here. This is an extreme moderate action. And what this is for is crappie fishing. Crappie have extremely soft lips, and I pull in a big hook set on them, and I keep a ton of bend in there. And what that does is it keeps that jig planted in that crappie's mouth. If he shakes his head, the line never goes slack, and it never rips that hook free. Because when you're crappie fishing, you're using very tiny hooks. You need light line so it doesn't snap the line. And you need a big cushion in that rod so you don't rip the hooks free. Crappie have very soft mouths. If you've ever heard of them, you know what I'm talking about. That's why a moderate action is important. This moderate just applied to a bass rod. It applied to an ultralight rod. Once again, we're talking about power there. And then it applied to my trolling rod, which is a big, heavy rod. And we'll get into that at a later time. So as you can see, the action of the rod has nothing to do with the power of the rod. More or less the type of fish you're fishing for, the lure that you're using, the bait that you're using, how heavy of hooks you're using. If you're using a big heavy hook and a little tiny light line, that's not going to work. You know, you can't have a massive reel on this ultralight rod. You understand the concept. So remember that. The action of the rod is crucial to your lure and crucial to the species of fish you're fishing for. I'm Nick, the Informative Fisherman. If you want to help me out and help out others, if you want to help out the show, check out my foundation. I just started it. It's on the informativefisherman.com page. Help me out, help out others, get yourself in the drawing, get some discounts on trips. I'm Nick, the Informative Fisherman, and we'll see you next time.